The John LeBang Show has been known to make people laugh, sing, think, scream, throw things in rage, and generally lose their minds. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, Earthlings, and alert the media. The John LeBang Show is broadcasting worldwide. We have another great 60 minutes of sonic vibrations headed your way. In the second segment, and carrying us right until the end of the show, we're bringing in our good friend, Derek Shelmerdine, for another installment of Rock and Roll Unraveled. But until then, we're going to talk about some of the main headlines that are in the news, because we didn't have a first hour this week like we normally do. We rebroadcasted Shady and the Mystery Freaks. In case you had all missed it, this week of Halloween, we wanted to give you a little bit of Halloween mood right here on the John LeBang Show. And that's going to tail into the Rock and Roll Unraveled with Derek Shelmerdine, because we're going to talk about what happened in rock and roll in the month of October and right around Halloween. Also, I'd like to announce that we've got our 250th episode not that far away, and we'd like to include you, the listener, in on that episode. If you have a question for the John LeBang Show or myself, John LeBang, feel free to make yourself a smartphone video telling us your name, where you're from, and giving us one question that has been eating at your mind ever since you heard the John LeBang Show. And on that 250th episode, we are going to answer all those questions for you. But until then, we've got to do this episode. And, well, looks like the Russia investigation is going to be making big headlines this week and maybe into the near future, as Mueller finally is going to press charges on somebody somewhere. And for some of you who are listening to the John LeBang Show, and you're saying, well, he's already indicted this person. Well, the John LeBang Show is recorded on some of these stations. Some of the stations out there replay the John LeBang Show original broadcast on a different day. So please bear with me as I am going by the information that is currently available. And according to the news reports, and especially over there at CNN, these charges are going to be the first and maybe of many that are going to start coming down on people who are associated with the Trump administration, the Trump campaign, maybe even Russia. See, it's been a big thing about Russia, as most of you have known about and have spent time with us digesting the information that has come in, and we have realized that there's not much that the Trump administration, from what we can tell, is guilty of when it comes to collusion with the Russian government on hacking the election, which, from all indications, whatever hacking they might have done, we're speaking the Russians, it didn't affect the election, according to Comey, according to just about every source out there. It didn't change the results of the election, but it's a big story. And we've been going through, over 5 months of investigative reporting on the subject. And we've been watching Mr. Mueller try to find every little scrap of evidence to the point of manufacturing it. And during all this, whatever indictments do come down, whatever charges may be brought upon whoever they're going to go after, I want to know why CNN and the Clinton administration and the Clinton Foundation and Hillary herself aren't being tied to any of this Russian collusion thing. When we get into the Fusion GPS and we find out that money was being transferred between them, they were like the little center point in all this. And it shows them having ties to specific Russian officials and them having specific ties to Clinton officials and the DNC and CNN. We start wondering, hey, maybe that's why we're not hearing anything on that side of the aisle. We're not hearing about the connections in the mainstream media from CNN, MSNBC, and alike about the Fusion GPS. I mean, it's starting to leak out now. It's starting to come out now because after so many months, other people besides Mueller have had time to investigate this issue. And one thing's clear. The Clinton administration, the Clinton Foundation, Fusion GPS do have direct ties with the Russian government, do have direct ties with taking money from them, and do, have signs that they were colluding with each other during the election. Yet the entire focus has been on the Trump administration, the Trump campaign, Trump allies, the Republican Party. And from what I can tell from my investigative reporting, my research, the Clintons, the Clinton Foundation, CNN, are all deeply embedded with Fusion GPS and the Russian government. Yet it is not making the headlines. We understand that. CNN's not going to report on themselves doing dirty tricks behind our back. They didn't have integrity in the first place. We can't expect them to have integrity when it comes to this. So we're going to find out what's going to happen over the next few weeks, and it's going to be big headlines in the mainstream media, and we're going to see whoever they indict, and I can guarantee it's not going to be Mr. Trump himself. They've had to shake out as much as they can, and I am feeling that they are going to have a very, very flimsy charge against somebody, something that really doesn't have a whole lot to do with the big picture of Russia affecting the election. It's probably going to be more like somebody just did something out of line, maybe by accident, and as long as it's not Hillary Clinton, they can go to jail for it. They can be charged for it. Hillary does something by accident, forget about it. No big deal. Anyways, folks, we got to take our first break. Derek Shelmerdine and Rock and Roll Unraveled on the other side of this. Stay tuned.
Now, don't get your panties all worked up.
The John LeBang Show will be right back.
And you'll love it.
check out the new book from Derek Shelmerdine,
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
It tells the story of rock and roll from its roots right up until the mid-70s punk.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Not just the music, but also the events that shaped the music.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
It includes the backgrounds to recording sessions, singles, album releases, births and deaths, epic concerts, and festivals.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Shelmerdine has made a painstaking effort to document pretty much every event that would prove significant in shaping popular music.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Purchase the book at www.rockandrollunraveled.com. Follow him at Twitter at R&R Unraveled, and look him up on Facebook at Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
By author Derek Shelmerdine.
Available now.
I think of myself more as a song and dance man, you know.
The only reason that we are still together is that the subtlety of delicate change in the music.
Some of it's old, some of it's new, something borrowed, something brown.
Let's say you have a band that wears makeup, and you've got snakes, and you've got guillotines, and you've got really hard rock, Detroit rock and roll.
All those groups and people that started off when we were starting off are all still going.
It's funny how many times rock and roll has been dead. Yeah, how many times people have said it's been dead, it just keeps coming back like a bloody phoenix. Rock and roll!
And ladies and gentlemen, we're bringing back our good friend, Mr. Derek Shelmerdine, for another exciting episode of Rock and Roll Unraveled. Derek, how are you today?
I'm very well. Great to be talking to you again, John. There's so much interesting and really spooky stuff happening in the world of rock and roll around Halloween itself and the week or so before. And some of the biggest bands in the world have all got some really spooky stories associated with them. Well, Led Zeppelin, we start with Led. They released their second album in the UK on Halloween in 1969. Nothing too spooky about this, apart from the lawyers' bills, I guess, because 3 of the tracks on that second album all got sued for plagiarism. Willie Dixon did them for a Whole Lot of Love. He thought that was a lot too close to his You Need Love. And he also wasn't acknowledged on the fact that Bring It On Home was his song. They were both rectified after discussions with lawyers, and also the Lemon song on that particular album was very much based on Howlin' Wolf's Killing Floor. He also got his lawyers to have a chat, and that finally got credited to him as well. I usually see Chester Burnett as the credit for a Howlin' Wolf song.
And that was something that happened with Zeppelin a lot, is people thought they took or borrowed their music to make their own music.
That's right, yeah. They I'm not sure the word guilty's correct, but they did it a lot. They took other people's stuff. And Spirit as well. The very strange lawsuit that ended just recently that they actually won. And if you listen to those 2 tracks, they really do sound a trifle similar. Mm-hmm. But Zeppelin's third album, released the following year, well, the week in the UK, it was released on the 23rd of October. In America, it was released on the 5th of October, so still very Halloweenish. This one really does have some seriously spooky associations. Jimmy Page really quite got into the occult, and he became a follower of the doctrines of a guy called Aleister Crowley, who in 1904 wrote a book called the Book of the Law, which was based on his claims of a voice he heard over a 3 or 4 day period. He wrote all these things down and created the Book of the Law. Now, some of the early Led Zeppelin 3 albums actually have cut out into the run out groove, Do What Thou Wilt and So Meet It Be, which actually quotes from verse 40 of Crowley's book, the Book of the Law. I think it's only the early releases that had that. Well, Jimmy Page has a number of associations with Crowley. Just before we get to the next one, that particular album has a track called Hats Off to Roy Harper. He was a well-known British folk singer around the time. He used to support them a lot. And one of the reasons I would mention this is we talked about some interesting band names. And John Bonham and Jimmy Page played in Roy Harper's backing band on the 14th of February 74 at the Rainbow in London. And they called the band the Intergalactic Elephant Band.
What a name.
Wow, I think that has got to be up there with the best ever name creations. But Jimmy Page did quite well in himself. He featured on Roy Harper's 1971 album Stormcock, and for contractual reasons he couldn't be listed as Jimmy Page. He's listed as S. Flavius Mercurius. Absolutely.
And that's because he was under contract and couldn't actually use his surname, right?
I guess so, yeah. Yeah, because he was very much under contracted then. But I mean, Harrison did a similar sort of thing as well. He was credited on a number of albums under a nom de plume or various nom de plumes. But more about Aleister Crowley. He just pops up all over the place. And Led Zeppelin, they around 76, they had a movie released a movie called "The Song Remains the Same," where each of them did a fantasy sequence, and Jimmy Page chose to do his near Loch Ness at Boleskine House, which is where he lived. And Boleskine House he actually bought from Aleister Crowley in 1971. So obviously that relationship carries on.
So he was deeply infatuated or interested in Aleister Crowley.
Oh, very much. Yeah, very much. And also, interestingly enough, David Bowie makes reference to him in a track called Quicksand on Hunky Dory. He refers to Aleister Crowley and the Golden Pond, and the Golden Dawn. And what he says is, "I'm closer to the Golden Dawn, immersed in Crowley's uniform of imagery." Golden Dawn was a society in the late 18th, early 19th centuries that studied the occult. By about the 1930s, I think it more or less petered out. But you can imagine that David Bowie would find himself interested in this whole sort of area.
Yeah, we've spoken about the Knights of the Golden Dawn on our show in the past.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah.
So Aleister Crowley's all over, and David Bowie himself, if you watch a lot of his music videos, you can see that he has a lot of occult symbolism throughout the videos.
Yeah.
He was
absolutely
deeply into that as well.
Yeah. And even the Beatles crop up on the Aleister Crowley story, because if you look at the Sgt. Pepper album, and as everybody knows, that's the one with all the various celebrities in a collage on the front cover. Aleister Crowley pops up at the top left-hand corner. He's the bald guy at the top left-hand corner of the sleeve, and apparently it was Paul that picked Aleister Crowley out to appear on the cover.
Oh, the apparent dead man who wasn't dead.
Well, exactly. I mean, the sort of linking to the later Beatles story, it's really quite interesting how associations of death pop up in the Beatles story all over the place. And fortunately, there's somebody on tour to enable the Led Zeppelin people to pop into this particular edition, and that's Robert Plant. And he's got a UK tour running from the 16th of November through to the 12th of December. So an opportunity to see him on the road.
Yeah, and I would love to have a chance of seeing him, but you said that's only in the UK, correct?
Yeah, that particular tour only visits the UK.
Well, that's all right. He wants to play for the UK crowd. That's hometown for him, isn't it, basically?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, though, is that's the sort of opposite of how a lot of Led Zeppelin's was, because they weren't finding much success in the UK. They chose to go off to America to start their career, and they found fame from there. And in the UK, they had a policy of not releasing singles because they felt they were an albums band. But in the US, they released a bunch of singles, So it's quite interesting, really. And most of the albums were released. A lot of the albums were released in the America before they were released in the UK.
Well, they had a little bit. I mean, a couple of their albums were very Americana style music, so I could see why they would play well here versus back in the UK or other countries.
Yeah, absolutely. But already referred to the Beatles. Now, the Beatles have got a few Halloween associated things. It was really Halloween 1963 that broke the Beatles in America. They were returning from their first ever foreign tour, which wasn't Germany, and from Sweden, and they were at Heathrow Airport, and there were hundreds of, which was quite a lot in those days, hundreds of screaming fans at the airport, and Ed Sullivan just happened to be changing planes at the same time and saw all this going on at the airport, asked what it was all about, told that the mop-top Beatles were the best thing since sliced bread, and he decided that he'd invite them over onto his show. And 4 months later, around February I think it was, they appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, and the rest, as they say, is history.
And just by chance, he was at the airport at the same time when they arrived?
Pure coincidence. He didn't really know. Well, he didn't know who they were, because at that stage, I mean, they were starting to branch out. But that was Sweden was their first venture outside British waters, apart from Hamburg, of course. And they were massive in the UK. By the end of 1963, they really were picking up a serious head of steam in the UK. And I think they did appear on TV before Ed Sullivan, briefly. And the other thing, of course, was that Capitol Records didn't pick up their option, because the Parlophone EMI, the UK label, their sister company in America was Capitol, and George Martin offered them the songs, but they didn't think that the Beatles were going to sell, which is why the first album and first bunch of singles were actually on VJ and Swan, until Capitol decided that around the time of the Ed Sullivan show, around the December, January, they picked up their option. I Want to Hold Your Hand, I think, was the first American hit, and it just went from strength to strength, led to the British invasion, and the Beatles becoming a legend, really, I guess.
Sure. And when did they start their own label?
That would have been about 66, 7.
Okay.
I can't remember the first one that was on that.
And that was they were popular enough where they said, we're just going to do our own stuff and forget about it, having the record company dictate things to them.
Oh, absolutely. But they did venture with Apple. They did venture into the clothes business as well. They opened a store in Baker Street in London. But that was a complete disaster, because they had no interest whatsoever in making money. I mean, the business just absolutely hemorrhaged money. And I think Alan Klein was managing them by then. And he wasn't a man to throw money around. And he very much closed the whole business down.
Which was a nightmare for them.
Oh, absolutely. Well, they just lost a fortune, but they weren't really that interested. If you think of the culture of the 60s, money was a very uncool kind of thing. It was uncool to be into money, particularly. And the whole idea of the Apple label was to bring on other new acts and help them. It was very sort of humanitarian kind of business. They wanted to put back into the music world, as it were. Interestingly enough, by Halloween 1969, on Halloween in the UK, they released the singles "Something" and "Come Together," which was sort of good news and bad news. It was really good news for George Harrison, because that was the only song, certainly in the UK, that was issued as a Beatles A-side, and it's the most covered song after Yesterday of the sort of songs to come from that area. And in the UK, it's just as a matter of interest, it was the only UK time that album tracks were used as a single. I know that was very much different in America, because up until Sgt. Pepper, the album releases were all different. Even the ones that had the same name had different tracks.
And Come Together was the B-side?
Come Together, yeah. Now that was the sort of bad news of the good news and bad news. Bad news for John Lennon. It's credited to Lennon McCartney, but he essentially wrote it. And Chuck Berry's publisher, Morris Levy, sued Lennon for plagiarism for Come Together, because he reckoned that, well, he didn't just reckon. I mean, Lennon had slightly lifted a line from Berry's You Can't Catch Me. And what Lennon sang was, here come old flat top, he come grooving up slowly. And what Berry had been playing along to some years earlier was, here come a flat top, he was moving up with me. And that was enough for a major plagiarism lawsuit. I mean, it's a really long story, all this, because the way Lennon got around it is he agreed to include a couple of Chuck Berry songs on his on an album. And he chose Rock and Roll, and Rock and Roll was the 1975 album he was making with Phil Spector. And there's quite a big story about how all that panned out. And he did end up including You Can't Catch Me, his version of it, and Sweet Little 16 on his Rock and Roll album. So Chuck Berry finally got royalties, as it were, from what would obviously John Lennon would be a big selling album.
All right, folks, we're up against our half-hour break. But don't go anywhere. More of Derek Shelmerdine and Rock and Roll Unraveled on the flip side of this.
Smoke 'em if you got 'em, because the John LeBang Show will be right back after this.
That's guaranteed. Yes. CRRM, CarePoint Billing Services. Their billers and managers are all dedicated to working for you to increase your profits. For more information, call CRRM at 248-579-3805. CRRM, CarePoint Billing Services.
Hey, man, it's at the bottom of the hour, man. Do you know where your kids are, man?
Forces of darkness, the treasonable minds who collaborate, must, can, and will be wiped from the face of the earth.
Boy, the rap artists of today wouldn't be able to do anything with those kind of standards.
Absolutely. On the Spooky Beatles side, when they were putting the whole anthology thing together, obviously John Lennon had died some years earlier. They were outside doing a photo shot around the time they were recording Free as a Bird. And there's this photograph of the three of them standing outside by a tree, and a very rare white peacock walking behind them at the back of the shot. And Paul believed that it was very much John Lennon signalling his sign of approval for the project.
Right, and Free as a Bird was done much later.
That's right. Yeah, it was a song that Lennon had recorded. There was a sort of well, not really a test pressing, just an early recording of it. And what they did, they sort of dubbed themselves across onto that song. So it was the four of them. But if you think back to the interesting attachment there is that if you think back to the Abbey Road album, John's the one in the front of the four of them walking across the zebra crossing in a white suit. So you can very much see the reason why Paul might think it was John looking down on them. And saying,
sure,
hey,
and they
guys,
were playing the Dead Paul thing on that album cover as well. They were playing off on that.
Yeah, that's very much part of the Paul is Dead thing. There's a Volkswagen Beetle parked just behind them in the shot, and it's got the registration 28 if, which would have been his age if he'd lived. And there's a lot of things on the Pepper album as well, supporting conspiracy theorists about Paul's demise.
Sure, and they even dabbled. They've got Helter Skelter, which was kind of a weird, crazy little tune in itself, where it kind of dabbled into some weird stuff.
That's right, yeah. And that was picked up by Manson, of course.
Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, number nine. I mean, you listen to that for a while, that gets a little freaky.
Yeah. Yeah, it's no wonder that the Beatles are still considered to be the greatest band of all time. I mean, their stuff is not just timeless; it just sort of crops up in so many different ways at so many different levels. And what's good news for people looking for somebody to go and watch on tour in America is that Ringo Starr is in America at the moment, 30th of October through the 16th of November. So he's very much looking to please the American crowds.
And that's his like all-star band he does all the time?
That's right.
Yeah, that thing's cool.
Oh, it's great. And Paul McCartney, he's over the other side of the globe. He's in Australia and New Zealand.
I have to tell you, Derek.
Yep.
I did some work for a local radio station here, and in exchange, they gave me a pair of tickets to see Paul McCartney at our new hockey arena.
Oh, wow.
And I told my brother to take my mother because she just was in love with Paul McCartney and never got to see him. So here at 69 years old, my mom goes see Paul McCartney, the love of her life, and my brother takes her. And I work for it, and I give those tickets away. I'm pretty awesome.
You're such a good man.
So, I'm sorry, he's on tour right now.
Yeah, he's in Australia, New Zealand, so that's a bit of a trip over to see him, unless, of course, you're living in Australia or New Zealand.
And we have an affiliate station there now, so maybe some of our listeners will get a chance to go check him out.
Yeah, that'd be absolutely brilliant. He's around at about from the half of December, the first half, 2nd to 16th of December. So they should be, as you say. I mean, they'll be really good gigs.
And we got more rock and roll. You know, you brought up Aleister Crowley, and I keep thinking that we need to talk about Ozzy, because Ozzy had the song Mr. Crowley. I mean, Ozzy's like the Halloween master.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, one thing he is mega famous for, and I think it's a great story, is that he really did bite a bat's head off. It was at a gig at the Veterans Memorial Auditorium in Des Moines, Iowa, on the 20th of January 1982. Oh, it's a great story. What happened is a fan threw a bat onto the stage, and Ozzy thought it was made of rubber, as you would. Who'd expect somebody to bring a live bat in with them? Osborne picked it up, and he bit the bat's head off. Now, the bat took a dim view of this, and it bit him back. So he was taken off after the show. He was taken off for the first of a series of rabies injections.
Oh, that's one of the most famous stories in rock and roll history right there.
Absolutely.
And who would have thought that would be a real bat? And, you know, Ozzy, being the man he is, was just going to do something crazy anyways. And, I'm sure he didn't feel well, even if it didn't get him back.
Oh, I mean, imagine biting through and then discovering it wasn't rubber. Oh, dear, oh, dear.
That crunch. Yeah.
Exactly. But, I mean, he actually has made a comeback on Halloween 2015. He did a solo comeback at, New Orleans at the Voodoo Fest. Where else? But he's actually, not so much on tour at the moment, but on the 4th of November, he's actually at the Glen Helen Amphitheater in San Bernardino, California. It's a festival. It's a sort of Ozfest meets the Nuts Fest, Slipknot. And on the Saturday, the 4th, he's headlining a bunch of people, including Prophets of Rage and Deftones. And on the Sunday, Marilyn Manson and Rob Zombie are appearing. So that should be quite a weekend. You can get tickets for either the Saturday or the Sunday or the 2 days. So that should be a great weekend.
Definitely. And, you know, I would be remiss not to bring up some of the Sabbath things that he did. Even though Paranoid, the album, came out in September, the song itself really was hitting it big in October of that year. And it wasn't just a few years ago when Black Sabbath had their own 3D Halloween maze.
Yeah.
And people could go through that thing. So, Ozzy, Black Sabbath, they all are perfect for the whole Halloween scenario.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you couldn't imagine Halloween without Ozzy Osbourne. Or, in fact, Alice Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's got some strong associations as well with Halloween. I mean, he's got another one of those bizarre moments in rock and roll when he was accused of drinking the blood of a dead chicken on stage, which may or may not have been the case. But the stage in being mentioned was the Toronto Rock and Roll Revival at the Varsity Stadium in said Toronto. And what a bill. I mean, the Doors were headlining. But then rock and roll legends, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, Bo Diddley, Gene Vincent, they were all on the same bill. As well as a guy called Screaming Lord Sutch from the UK, he probably had never made it very big in America, but he was one of life's real rock and roll characters. He's also on the bill.
I think you've brought him up before.
Yeah. Oh, he's a great guy. Became a politician. He led the Teenage Party for a while, and the Monster Raving Loony Party. He was famous for. He actually stood against Britain's Prime Minister, Titan, in a general election for the Monster Raving Loony Party. Didn't win, sadly. But that Toronto gig as well was John Lennon's Plastic Ono Band's first ever performance. So he was still with the Beatles, of course, September 1969.
What a great show.
Oh, absolutely. And that featured future Yes drummer Alan White. But the story that sort of comes from that, the chicken incident, was Alice Cooper. As part of his sort of normal act at that time, he'd explode some pillows on stage and it would shower the audience with feathers. And someone again threw a live chicken to Cooper. Now, this time he didn't think it was rubber, but he sort of rationalised that because it's got wings, it could fly. He got that a bit wrong. He threw it into the audience, believing it would fly there, and the audience just tore it apart.
Oh. That's terrible.
So it wasn't his fault at all, that particular one. But apparently the following day, it was reported that he'd bitten off their head, he'd drunk its blood on stage. And he'd recently signed to Frank Zappa, to his new, I think it was the first single and first album, actually, on the Straight label, Zappa's Straight label. And Zappa phoned him to ask if it was true about all that. And Alice Cooper said, no, it wasn't. But Zappa suggested he should keep that information to himself because that kind of publicity you just can't buy.
Right.
So the myth about Alice Cooper drinking the blood of a chicken all came from there. But I mean, what a stage act, this guy! And you could not imagine that he wouldn't have a pretty serious bash at Halloween along the way. And he did this short tour of the UK in 2011, and it was called the Halloween Night of Fear Tour. And it ended up in Glasgow on the 31st. And there is an amazing video of the whole show, and I'll be putting that up on the website with the notes for this particular conversation. And if you love Alice Cooper, if you have a remotest interest in Alice Cooper, this has to be seen. He's there with the snakes as usual, but he's got Frankenstein's monster. He drags a life-size female doll around the stage. He caresses it. He gives it a good spanking at one point. And he even has his head cut off by a guillotine on stage. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of seeing him in concert, and it is just it's an entire, it's like a musical, it's like a Broadway production. There's so much going on.
Absolutely.
And he's got a lot of songs that could be related with Halloween, Dead Babies and I Love the Dead. I mean, he worked that angle really well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of headstones and stuff feature on all kinds of things associated with him. But that particular show ends up with Arthur Brown, The Crazy World of Arthur Brown, He had this song in the mid-'60s, about '67, I think, called Fire, and he performs it, and he does it in this show. He's got this metal, well, I can't call it a hat, like a headpiece, and they set fire to it. It's obviously, it won't be petrol, but it'll be whatever, paraffin or whatever. And you've got flames a good foot, 18 inches above his head. I mean, he has burnt himself a few times actually doing it. And it's quite an awesome sight, really, to see him on stage. And, of course, Alice Cooper's on tour at the moment. And you can see him all over the place. He's in the UK, across Europe, Canada, and the USA, through 8th of November to the 29th of March.
Yeah, so that's an extensive tour.
Oh, yeah, I mean, and that tour's been going on for a while as well.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that will just play and play and play. He just tours all the time, album or not, and he's done some work with all kinds of different artists, from his early band that was just a bunch of great musicians to some of his more recent stuff, where he's even done a mini album with Slash from Guns N' Roses.
Yeah, I mean, the guy never stops. He owns a restaurant as well, I think.
Where do you think you're going? The John LeBang Show will be right back.
So grab a beer and a smoke and sit your butt back down. Stay right here. And I'd like to welcome our new sponsor, Pane in the Glass, commercial and residential window cleaning. For a beautiful, sparkling shine that's crystal clear, call Pane in the Glass Window Cleaning. You can find them on Facebook at Pane in the Glass.
Powerful, epic music by Toot Box Roll. Life-changing lyrics come in every style, empowering humanity to finally unlock the chains of bondage. Experience the edgy side of positive music and rock your world today. From Primal to Divine, available now at sassyalternativemusic.com.
If you are elderly, disabled, receiving SSI or Medicaid, and you have a medical need or require assistance with daily housework, shopping, grooming, medication, you may qualify for housekeeping at no cost. Call now, VIP Home Healthcare, 248-579-3805. VIP Home Healthcare, there when you need them. That's 248-579-3805.
If you want to contact the John LeBang Show, feel free to send an email to jlebang@live.com. And if you're on Twitter, look him up at John LeBang. And don't forget to go to his Facebook page at The John LeBang Show. Now here's John.
All right, welcome back, folks. We continue our conversation with Derek Shelmerdine, author of Rock and Roll Unraveled. Derek, any more rock and roll history connected with Halloween?
I think one of the nice Halloween things is that Queen managed to release their most successful, some people think, best single of all time, Bohemian Rhapsody, released on Halloween in the UK. It was released on Halloween in 1975. But the reason I thought it'd be good to include them was because in 1978, again in New Orleans, wherever, they were playing a gig, and they had the most unbelievable, legendary after-gig party. They went scouring Mormon Street for all kinds of freaks and people and ladies of the night, brought them all back to the hotel. A vast amount of food and alcohol were consumed. There were acrobats and fire eaters and you name it. It was going on. Absolutely unbelievable. When they picked the bill up, apparently it was in the region of $200,000.
Well, that's a hell of a party.
Oh, for one after-gig party. Can only be on Halloween. And, of course, they are touring as well with Adam Lambert. And they're all over the place. Europe, Scandinavia, UK, New Zealand and Australia. The Europe, Scandinavia, UK is 1st of November to the 16th of December. Then they have a bit of a break to go to New Zealand, Australia. And that's from the 17th of February to the 6th of March. So they're still busy.
Yeah, that's a good little tour that a lot of people who really haven't had a chance to see Queen should go out there and check them out.
Absolutely, and I actually think with Adam Lambert as well, it'll bring them to a whole new audience.
Right, because, just because Freddie Mercury is not with them, which he's one of the greatest vocalists of all time, you still have the band who created a lot of that music playing, and, it'd just be great to watch.
Absolutely. Oh, I think it'd be good. I'd certainly go and see it if I got half a chance. And I thought to round off, we could look at, with it being Halloween and the whole back from the grave kind of context, there's really a celebration of the dead. Some of the more bizarre stories from the world of rock and roll. And start with the Doors and Ray Manzarek. He has this dream that Jim Morrison returns from France, having been there to sort of find himself and pull himself together. And Ray Manzarek asks him what he's been doing and if he's been working on any more new material. And just before he answers, Manzarek wakes up. Now, what is really spooky is Robbie Krieger. He claims to have exactly the same dream.
Yeah, so they're having a Wayne's World moment.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's spooky country. But more spooky Morrison. In 2009, a photo emerged of his ghost lingering over his grave in Paris. And apparently the photograph has been tested and has been shown not to be fake. So I think that's... there's so many great stories. I mean, Cass Elliot from the Mamas and the Papas, Mama Cass, she's reputed to haunt Dan Aykroyd's Hollywood home because she previously owned it. Now, Beverly D'Angelo, I think it's the lady that was in National Lampoon films, she bought the house from Dan Aykroyd, and she claims to have seen Cass Elliot's ghost as well.
Yeah, well, he was a Ghostbuster, Mr. Dan Aykroyd, so maybe he put her there.
That's very true. He didn't manage to get rid of her by all of accounts. And even Jimi Hendrix crops up. He's been, or the sound of Jimi Hendrix has been heard to sort of waft across Yale's Woolsey Hall. And he played there on the 17th of November 68, so the acoustics must be pretty good.
So since you brought up Jimi Hendrix, in the late 90s, I lived in Seattle, and the apartments that I stayed at, Jimi Hendrix's grave was about 300 yards from my bedroom, and you'd go out there and you'd see people just hanging out all the time, partying up. It's Seattle, so they have a little party in them.
Yeah,
and that's one of the small little memories I have of living out there. It was like right there I could just walk right to his gravesite.
Well, Buddy Holly, the residents of Clearwater, that's where Buddy Holly's plane crashed. They claim to see a phantom plane in the sky and ghostly lights flare up. Ooh. So he's obviously popping up again. I think Graham Parsons, one of the real founding fathers of country rock. He only did one album with the Byrds, Sweetheart and the Rodeo, before he went off and formed Flying Burrito Brothers.
That's a great name too.
Oh, it is. I mean, they were a great album, a great band. I really like Graham Parsons, and it was strange. Really, he died in the Joshua Tree Inn in the Joshua Tree National Park. And a strange story associated with his death. He'd said that he wanted to be buried, a sort of Viking funeral, but in the middle of the park. So his roadie, I can't remember his name offhand, he went and stole the body and took it to the national park. And he actually he set fire to the body in the coffin. And apparently, which is exactly what Graham Parsons wanted. But the police took a dim view of this. But apparently they couldn't do him for setting fire to the deceased body, but they could do him for setting fire to the coffin because that was damage to property.
So he got busted for burning the coffin, but not for burning the body.
Apparently that's a popular story. Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And also he said to haunt his hometown of Waycross. And of course, you've got to finish up with Elvis Presley. I mean, he's been seen in Graceland, he's been seen in RCA Studios in Memphis, and of course there have been well-documented sightings of him on the moon.
Hey, there's been people who have seen him in Kalamazoo, Michigan, not far from me. So he's all over, man. Now that he's retired and out of it all, he can go and hang out. Maybe he's driving a Winnebago or maybe a little Volkswagen Rabbit or something. Who knows?
It would be great to think that was true, wouldn't it?
Yep.
That would be brilliant. So, I mean, no tours there, though?
No tours there. Well, of course not, because if you want to see Elvis, you just go to Las Vegas.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm sure they got impersonators out there. Hey, I know they even have impersonators that'll marry people.
I know.
In an Elvis outfit.
I actually met somebody, funny enough, last week. I went away on holiday for a week, and I got chatting to somebody, and I said, "Oh, I always quite fancy getting married in Las Vegas." And they said, "Oh, we did," and they were married by an Elvis impersonator. Absolutely incredible.
Well, if you're going to go into marriage, you either take it really seriously or you make it a big joke, right?
Yeah, exactly. Life's too short.
I was going to say, do you want to tell people about your book and your social media?
Yeah, that would be great. And the other thing is I've got a really big book signing coming up this weekend. It's at a 2-day jukebox fair in Chessington in Surrey, and it looks like great 2 days, the organisers. I mean, as well as jukeboxes and lots of singles. There's retro clothing, there's jiving, there's a jive competition, there's live music, and that should be an awful lot of fun. And yeah, if I could just say that the book Rock and Roll Unraveled tells the story of rock and roll from its blues roots, Robert Johnson the like, through to mid-punk in the mid-70s punk era. And it also, not just the music, it looks at the influences like the Vietnam War and the civil rights movement, and that's available on Amazon. And the website's well worth checking out. It's www.rockandrollunraveled. That's with 2 L's, the UK spelling of that. And Facebook and Twitter I'm also quite busy on. Facebook's at Rock and Roll Unraveled, and Twitter's at RNR Unraveled. So they're all very similar. If you remember Rock and Roll Unraveled, the website actually picks it up with 1 or 2 L's, so not too much problem there.
These book signings you're going to be doing, you're going to be posting like you do every day on Facebook, because you're really good about posting some of the rock and roll history on that day on your Facebook, and you tweet a lot as well. So are we going to see pictures from this book signing?
Oh, absolutely. And what I'll be doing is I did quite an interesting one about a couple of months ago, which was at a big quiz festival in the UK. And some of the biggest professional quizzes from TV shows like The Chaser and other TV shows, they were there. And 3 of these professional quizzes on the TV, Eggheads, that was the name I was just trying to think of. 3 of the Eggheads, one of which has been the world quizzing champion for 7 years running. 3 of them bought the book, so I was quite pleased about that. So I'll be posting some of those over the next few days, but certainly there'll be a lot of photographs following the weekend, because that's going to be such a fun weekend.
Yeah, your book's awesome. Every once in a while when I've got some time, I'll just pop it open and just read through a few things just to get my knowledge more up to date, because when we talk, you have so many more stories and I'm way behind you, and I'm trying to catch up on a lickety-split, and you know so much that it's tough. You spent a lot of time putting this book together.
That's right. I mean, it was a good 7 years, probably more. And what's nice about it, as you just said, you can sort of pick it up and put it down. It's not a start it's 700 pages, but it's not a start the beginning, read till the end. The centre of the book is it happened on this day. So it looks at all the main things that happened between the January the 1st and December the 31st across the years. And in fact, Record Collector magazine, the British equivalent to Goldmine, it said that Shelmerdine has documented just about everything that's worth knowing in rock and roll. So I was well pleased with that.
Your book's like a timeline, but it's so much more in depth because it breaks it up into like 3 different sections, so you can follow the timeline 3 different ways.
That's right. I mean, that was one of the reasons I did quite right. I mean, the first part is actually called Timeline, where it takes every one of those events on the 1st of January through 31st December, and then it puts them into a chronological order. And it gives real context to what was going on. And what's fascinating, I find now, is that you can see careers ebbing and flowing. You could see how rock and roll, the original 1950s rock and roll, effectively died away as Little Richard found God while he was on tour in Australia, renounced rock and roll. Jerry Lee Lewis came to the UK on tour, discovered that his the young lady with him was his wife, who was the 13-year-old daughter of his cousin. His career nosedived on both sides of the Atlantic after that. Elvis was called up and went into the army, and of course Buddy Holly was killed in a car crash, in a plane crash.
Celebrity, drop it like a deuce. If you want to win a prize, drop it like a deuce. Are you sure this is a good idea? If you want to have a good time, drop it like a deuce.
I have a bad feeling about this.
No need to sterilize.
Drop it like a deuce.
Oh no.
Drop it like a deuce. Drop it like a deuce. Drop it like a deuce.
Gibson or Fender?
Fender.
Brian Johnson or Bon Scott?
Brian Johnson.
Deep Purple or Rainbow?
Deep Purple.
Eric Clapton or Cream?
Cream.
What was your first album?
First album was the Stones' first album.
The very first album?
Very first album, yeah, with the actual extended version of the track. Sadly, I sold it.
You got rid of it.
Sorry?
You got rid of it.
Yeah, I know. It was in the days before you realised that, because I'm talking about buying records in the late 50s, early 60s, and there was no collector's market then. It was all just the new stuff that was coming out. And I got to a point where I got about 30 singles and 2 or 3 albums. It'd be about 1963, maybe 4. And I decided that I needed some money, so I just decided to sell them to a local second-hand record shop. I mean, all of those singles and albums. That would probably pay for my retirement.
All right, Derek, thank you so much. We'll see you next month.
My pleasure. I'm really looking forward to it.
And that was Derek Shelmerdine, rock and roll historian and author of the book, Rock and Roll Unraveled. That's it, ladies and gentlemen, as we tear through another 60 minutes of the John LeBang Show. I'd like to thank all of our affiliate stations across the fruited plains. Of course, thank our guest, Derek Shelmerdine. You can look him up on the web at Rock and Roll Unraveled. Don't forget to go to our website. That's www.jlebang.com. You can see archives of the show in video form right there on the main page. You can go check out all our interviews. You can also maybe go deep into our music show and see who we've played in our past episodes. With that being said, folks, I'd like to thank you, the listener, for being a major part of why the John LeBang Show has had tremendous success here in 2017. Bigger and better things are headed for us in 2018, including a massive research team that we are now building with people from all over the place. And we're going to be hitting it hard in 2018 with some investigative reporting. And until the vibrations of my vocal cords reach your ears again, this is John LeBang signing off from the Banger Studios.
3, 2, 1. We have liftoff. Tune in again next week. Same time, same space, same station.